Good afternoon everyone. My name is Astha Tripathi. I have completed my graduation from University of Allahabad and post-graduation from South Asian University. Presently, I am associated with DSNLU, Visakhapatnam. Today, we are going to study a very important topic in international law, that is disability rights in international law. I am sure you must have heard about the term disability. You must have seen disabled people in and around your neighborhood. You must have read many things about disability. Have you ever thought about this thing? What rights do they have? What international community has to offer on disability? Is there any legislation in India which protects rights of disability? And if there is any legislation at all, is that legislation is in harmony with international instruments? Today in this module, we will try to see the answers of all these questions. We will study this module in two parts. First part will be dealing with the international portion, which will be covering what all instruments are there at international level protecting the rights of disabled people. What all instruments are there to protect rights of disabled people. What are the rights given under these instruments to protect rights of disabled people? What is the obligation on the part of states? What is the implementation mechanism? And in other part, the second part, which we will be dealing with the international scenario. In that part, we will be covering important rights which is given in India. Before starting with the international part, I would like to draw your attention towards the term disability. What disability as a term, as a word generally means. We will try to see the definition given. We will try to see the meaning given in various dictionary. Disability as a term, as per Oxford Dictionary, means a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movement, senses or activities. So, as per Oxford Dictionary, disability is a physical or mental condition that is hindering a person's senses, movement and other activities. So, this physical or mental condition, it refers to medical model of disability. Similarly, Cambridge Dictionary defines disability as an illness, injury or condition that makes it difficult for someone to do things that other people do. It is certain kind of injury or illness that is hindering a person to do those work which other people do without that illness or injury. As per Merriam-Webster Dictionary, disability is a condition that damages or limits a person's physical or mental abilities. So, we have seen three definitions and one thing is common in these three definitions. It is certain kind of injury, some kind of limitation, either some kind of physical or mental condition which is obstructing a person to perform those work which other person without any disability can do. I would like to draw your attention towards certain facts which are given by United Nations. As per these facts, around 10% of the world's population, they live with disability. They are world's largest minority. Out of those 10%, 80% of the persons with disability, they live in a developing country. That is making their situation more worse. World Bank came out with a report with it says that 20% of the world's poorest people are disabled and they tend to be disregarded in their own community. A small survey was carried on in Odisha in year 2004. It says that women and girls with disability, they are particularly vulnerable to abuses. This report was basically concentrated on women and girls. In this report, it is stated that almost all women and all girls with disability, they were beaten up at home. 25% of the women with intellectual disability, they had been raped and 6% of disabled women had been forcibly sterilized. Another report was presented by UNICEF. It says that 30% of the street youth are disabled. As far as education is concerned, Position of disabled people in field of education is not very encouraging. 90% of the children with disability, they have never been to school, and the same is the position in employment. So by going through these facts, we can assess that their position is not very good in the society, and there are many hindrances that are obstructing them to perform on equal basis with others in the society. So we need an instrument and law that can protect their rights and by which they can assess and perform equally in the society. Now one may ask a question, why do we need a convention on disability when we already have many human rights instruments which are equally applicable to disabled person? We have International Covenant on Civil and Political Right, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Right. These two covenants along with Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they constitute Bill of Rights. All these instruments are equally applicable to all human beings irrespective of their special condition, whether they are disabled, whether they are refugee, whether they are suffering from any other illness. These instruments are applicable equally on all human beings. Now there are two reasons why do we need a special convention for protection of persons with disability. First reason is generality in provisions. All the instruments which we have just now discussed, they contain general provisions which deals with general human rights. None of the instruments have specific provisions in it which contains something specific about human rights of disabled person. The only instrument which has specific provision on human rights of disabled person is Child Right Convention. It provided for a specific article on children with disability. Other reason is specificity in provision or targeted convention. In past practice, world community has adopted many conventions which basically protects rights of targeted group. For example, CEDAW was adopted to protect rights of women. Child Right Convention was adopted to protect rights of children, and another convention on rights of refugees was adopted to protect rights of refugees. So adoption of specific convention, group specific convention, it itself shows that there are certain groups which needs special protection because of their special condition, because of their special needs. Special protection is needed to those groups. So we need a convention on person with disabilities. So world community has adopted a new convention on rights of person with disability to protect rights of person with disability. Now one question may also arise in your mind, that is it the only convention in international law which protects rights of person with disability? Was there any previous instrument in international law which actually protected rights of person with disability, or international law was vacuum before adoption of this convention on protection of rights of person with disability? There were certain international instruments which actually protected rights of person with disability. These instruments are Declaration on Rights of Mentally Retarded Person 1971, Declaration on Rights of Disabled Person 1975, World Programme of Action Concerning Disabled Person 1982, Standard Rules on Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disability 1993. These instruments which I have just mentioned, in past they protected rights of persons with disability. But one thing is common in all these instruments. All these instruments are non-binding in nature. These instruments only provided policy guidelines for protection of rights of disabled person. They do not create any legal obligation on part of states. So a convention, a legal instrument which protects rights of person with disability and which is binding, was required at international plane. Now we will discuss something about the Convention on Rights of Person with Disability. It was adopted on December 13, 2006 and came into force on May 3, 2008. It consists of 50 articles. it has 159 signatories and 151 members are parties to the convention. Optional protocol was adopted on the same day when the convention was adopted, that is December 13, 2006. It came into force on the same day when the convention came into force, that is May 3, 2008. But number of signatories in optional protocol are 96 and number of parties who have actually ratified the optional protocol are 85. There is one reason why there is difference in number of signatories to convention and number of signatories to protocol, because protocol has provided for this special mechanism, individual complaint mechanism. It says that if rights of a person with disability has been violated by a state, then that person can go to Committee on Person with Disability against that state for redressal. So because of this convention, because of this provision, this individual mechanism, many of the states were not happy with the protocol and they did not opt for protocol. Now we will see what is the purpose of the convention. Purpose of the convention is defined under Article 1. Basically, convention has twofold purposes. First purpose is to promote, protect and ensure full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedom by persons with disability. And second purpose is to promote respect for their inherent dignity. What Article 1 says about the purpose of the convention is, the purpose of the convention is to promote, protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedom by all persons with disability, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. So there are twofold purposes. One is to promote, protect and ensure full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by person with disability, and other purpose is to promote respect for their inherent dignity. Now, who is a disabled person as per the definition given in convention? Article 1 of the convention, it notes that a person with disability includes. Here the definition which is given is inclusive and non-exhaustive. It says that persons with disability include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in the society on an equal basis with others. So as per the definition, that impairment must be long-term impairment. What is long-term impairment is not defined anywhere in the convention. It is for international court to interpret the long-term, and one option is also available to state parties. They can mention what exactly is the long-term in their domestic legislation. But long-term disability means a disability for a substantial time period. Now, what are the kinds of impairment which is mentioned in the convention? It is physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment. We will see what physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment is. Physical impairment may include lameness, blindness, amputation of hands, amputation of legs, or for that matter of fact polio. Mental impairment may include cerebral palsy, schizophrenia, retardation. Intellectual impairment may include Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, Angelman syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, etc. Another impairment and last impairment which is given in the convention is sensory impairment. Sensory impairment means impairment pertaining to senses. What are senses? Nose, eyes, ear. So sensory impairment may include deafness, blindness or deafness, blindness together. Point here is to be noted is what is long-term disability. Long-term disability means disability for a substantial time period. Definition of long-term disability can be found in many long-term disability insurance or governmental statute. For example, Equality Act 2010 of UK, it defined long-term disability means a disability which lasts for more than 12 months. So it is for the states to define what exactly is long-term disability. Now we are going to see what rights are given under the convention. Before that, we will see what is the general obligation on part of state parties. Article 4 of the convention defines general obligation on part of state parties, which a state party needs to follow. We will discuss about some of the general obligation, not all. This obligation includes adoption of appropriate legislative, administrative or other measures for implementation of convention. So, a state is obliged to adopt appropriate legislative or executive or other measures to implement the convention. Or if there is any existing law, custom or practices that basically discriminate a person on the basis of disability, so that practices, custom or existing law has to be abolished. So, another obligation under the convention is to modify or to abolish existing laws, custom or practices that constitute discrimination against person with disability. State parties are obliged to ensure that its public authority and institution they act in conformity with the convention, and state parties are obliged to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination on the basis of disability by any person, organization or private enterprises. So, if any person, organization or private enterprises they are discriminating a person on the basis of his disability, then state party should adopt appropriate measures to eliminate such kind of discrimination. Or if there is any law, any custom, any practice which discriminate a person on the basis of his disability, so state party should modify those laws, should abolish those customs and practices. Moving to the rights of person with disability. This convention has provided various rights to the person with disability. One important right is equality and non-discrimination. The term equality and non-discrimination is self-explanatory. State party shall prohibit all kind of discrimination on the basis of disability, and it guarantees to a person with disability equal protection of law and equal treatment under law. Convention not only prohibit discrimination and provided equality, it moved little further. Convention says that in order to promote equality and eliminate discrimination, state parties shall take all appropriate steps to ensure that reasonable accommodation is provided to persons with disabilities. What is reasonable accommodation? The term reasonable accommodation is also defined in the convention. Reasonable accommodation means any necessary or appropriate modification and adjustment which is required to ensure that person with disability enjoy all human rights. So, any necessary or appropriate modification and adjustment which is needed so that a person with disability can enjoy his all human rights and fundamental freedom. Another important right which convention has provided is under Article 6. In this Article 6 you can see the successful intervention of feminist group. Article 6 is basically protects rights of women with disability. It says that state is required to adopt measures for ensuring equal enjoyment of human rights by women with disability, because women with disability they are subject to multiple discrimination. What is multiple discrimination? Multiple discrimination means discrimination on the basis of more than one ground. So, women suffers from multiple discrimination because they are disabled and discrimination because of their gender. So, this convention has recognized this multiple discrimination and says that states should take all measures so that women with disability can enjoy all human rights. Another important right which is provided in the convention is for children with disability, which is given under Article 7 of the convention. It says that state parties are under obligation to adopt measures for ensuring full and equal enjoyment of rights and fundamental freedoms by children. What important thing which this convention is provided under this article is that children with disability, they should have a right to express their views on all matters affecting them. So state parties are required to take their views. So state parties are required to take views of children with disability if state is going to make any law or state is going to form any policy for children with disability. And state is required to provide disabled children with age appropriate assistance so that they can enjoy their human rights. What important step the convention has taken is given under Article 8. It is relating to awareness raising. State parties are required to take every possible measures to create awareness about the skills, merits and abilities of person with disability. State parties are required to promote contribution of person with disability to the workforce and labor market. Article 8 went on further and says that state parties should foster at all level of education system an attitude of respect for rights of person with disability, and state shall try to combat all stereotype, prejudices and harmful practices relating to person with disability, including those practices which is based on sex and age in all areas of life. Convention went on further and provided access to justice for person with disability. It says that state parties shall ensure effective access to justice for person with disability, and to achieve this, state parties shall promote appropriate training for those who are working in administration of justice. For example, state parties shall provide training to police officer and prison staffs. The very important aspect which the convention is dealing is education. A right to education is protected under the convention. Right to education is protected under Article 24 of the convention. Under this article, state parties are obliged to recognize rights of person with disability to education without discrimination. So a disabled person have same right to education which a person who is not suffering from any disability has. And in order to avail this right, there are certain steps which state parties shall ensure. State parties shall ensure that persons with disability are not excluded from free and compulsory primary education. So it is obligation on part of state parties to provide free and compulsory primary education to persons with disability. And state parties are required to give reasonable accommodation to persons with disabilities according to their needs. State shall facilitate learning of braille, alternative script, augmentative or alternative modes, means and formats of communication. State shall also try to facilitate learning of sign language and promotion of linguistic identity of deaf community. So these are the steps which a state needs to take in order to protect right to education of person with disability. What we have just now discussed are some of the important rights which convention has provided. There are other rights which convention has provided pertaining to disability. We will be just referring to those rights. Right to life is provided in the convention, right to liberty and security of a person, freedom from torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, freedom from exploitation, violence and abuse, freedom from expression and opinion and access to information, right to privacy, liberty of movement and nationality, right to live independently and being included in the community. So there are many rights which are provided in the convention. Now we will be discussing the implementation mechanism. What implementation mechanism convention has to offer? Convention has provided for implementation mechanism on two levels. One is for national implementation and monitoring, and another mechanism is at international level. So national implementation and monitoring is given under Article 33. It says that state parties shall designate one or more focal point within the government for implementation of the present convention. What can be the focal point? It can be any department of the government, it can be any specific institution whose task will be implementation of the convention. State parties shall develop coordination mechanism whose duty would be to facilitate the implementation of the convention. Now we'll be seeing the implementation of convention. For implementation of convention, a committee on rights of person with disability is provided. The relevant article runs from article 34 to 39. It says that committee on rights of person with disability is there, whose work is to monitor, coordinate and implement the convention. This committee consists of 18 members who are elected by state parties, consideration being given to equitable geographical distribution, balanced gender representation and participation of experts with disability. All the parties are required to submit their regular report to the committee. First report is required to be submitted after 2 years of the signing of the convention, and after that every 4 years parties are required to submit the report. Convention has also provided for individual complaint. Optional protocol gives the committee competence to examine individual complaints with regard to alleged violation of the convention by state parties to the protocol. So, if any right of a person with disability is violated, so that person with disability have right to go to committee and complain about the same. Now we will be moving to the second part of the module, that is disability rights in India. What rights are available to disabled people in India? Disabled people are protected under constitutional provision, that is under Article 14, which talks about right to equality. Every person is equal and entitled to equal protection of law. Another article which talks about person with disability is Article 41. It says that state shall make effective provisions for securing the right to work, right to education and right to public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness and disablement. As we all know, Article 14 is directive principles of state policy. It is not binding, it is only a guidelines for states to follow. In India, we have one domestic legislation which protects rights of person with disability, that is Rights of Person with Disability, Equal Opportunities, Protection of Rights and Full Participation Act 1995. Objective of this act is to promote and ensure equality and full participation of the person with disability and to protect and promote economic and social rights. This act consists of 74 articles. We will not be discussing all articles, we will be only discussing with important articles. What rights are protected under the act? Now we will be discussing rights protected under the act. The main important right which is protected under the act is right to education. The act provided for free and compulsory education for children with disability up to 18 years of age. When we see Article 21A of Constitution of India, it protects right to education up to 14 years of age. This legislation has went further and provided right to education up to age of 18 years. This act provided for development of new assistive devices, teaching aids which are necessary to give a child with disability so that they can enjoy their all human rights and they can participate in society as on equal basis with others. As far as right to education is concerned, this act went further and it says that all governmental educational instruments shall reserve at least 3% of seats for person with disability, and out of which 1% shall be reserved for persons suffering from blindness or low vision, hearing impairment, locomotor disability or cerebral palsy. So out of these 3% reservation, 1% reservation is reserved for persons who are suffering from blindness or low vision, hearing impairment or locomotor disability. This act also provides for affirmative action on part of the government. Appropriate government and local authorities are required to frame certain schemes and certain laws under which they will provide preferential allotment of land to person with disability at very concessional rates for purposes of house, setting of business, setting of special recreation centers, establishment of special schools, establishment of research centers, establishment of factories by entrepreneur with disability. So for all these purposes, person with disability will be allotted land on preferential basis and at very concessional rate. Now the very important topic which Act is provided is non-discrimination and barrier-free access. Act has provided for non-discrimination in 4 sectors: non-discrimination in transport, non-discrimination on road, non-discrimination in built environment and non-discrimination in governmental employment. We will discuss all 4 sectors one by one. Non-discrimination in transport. Special measures are to be taken to adapt rail compartment, buses, vessels and aircraft so that it can become accessible to persons with disability. Second sector in which non-discrimination is provided is non-discrimination on road. The Act says that special measures has to be taken. Such measures shall include auditory signals at red light, engraving on surface of zebra crossing for blind person, or for causing curb cuts and slopes to be pavement for easy access to wheelchairs. All these small measures are to be taken by the government so that person with disability can equally participate in the society. Third sector in which non-discrimination is provided is non-discrimination in built environment. Government should provide ramps in public buildings, adaptation of toilets for wheelchair users, braille symbols and auditory signals in lift or elevators, ramps in hospital, etc. The fourth sector in which non-discrimination is provided is non-discrimination in government employment. It says that no person who is suffering with disability is to be reduced in rank because of his disability, or promotional benefits is to be denied to him because he is suffering from disability. So in all these sectors, non-discrimination and barrier-free access is provided under this Act. Now what are the enforcement mechanisms provided under the Act? The Act has provided for Central Coordination Committee at national level and State Coordination Committee at state level. It also includes Chief Commissioner Person with Disability at national level and Commissioner Person with Disability at state level. Now we will try to see what is the function of these committee and what is the function of Commissioner. Coordination Committee are entrusted with the task of facilitating comprehensive policy on disability, whereas Commissioner is entrusted with the task of monitoring the distribution and utilization of fund, and Commissioner is also empowered to take cognizance of the cases where rights of persons has been violated. The one important point is to be mentioned here is that Act which we have in India is passed in year 1995. And the convention which we have opted at international level is passed in year 2007. So now one question may arise, is the Act is in total harmony with the convention? Is the provision of our Disability Act is contravenes the convention, is against the convention? Although the present Act which is there in India is not against the convention, but it is not in total harmony with the convention. In order to modify the Act and repeal the provisions of the Act, a bill is pending in the Parliament. This bill, that is known as Disability Bill of year 2014. This bill was firstly introduced in year 2011. In last 3 years, this bill has undergone through various amendments. Till date, total 16 amendment has been there in this bill. So we are not sure whether this is the actual bill which is going to be passed. But for our knowledge, we will try to compare the important provisions of the Act and important provisions of the bill. We will start with the definition. What is the definition given in the Disability Act and what is the definition given in the Disability Bill? Disability Act 1995 adopts a medical model and defines disability as blindness, low vision, leprosy cure, hearing impairment, locomotor disability, mental retardation and mental illness. So basically they have provided 7 grounds. So basically they have provided 7 kinds of disability, whereas Disability Bill has included 19 conditions. Whereas Disability Bill has included 19 conditions that includes autism, low vision and blindness, cerebral palsy, deaf blindness, hemophilia, hearing impairment and other conditions. So When we see the act, the condition mentioned are very limited, and if we compare act with the bill, the condition mentioned are not that limited. Second element which we are going to compare is the amount of disability. Now, who is the person with disability under Act and the bill? A person suffering from not less than 40% of the disability and who has got certificate of the competent authority is regarded as person with disability under Person with Disability Act 1995, whereas the Disability Bill 2014, it has basically re-narrated the definition provided in the convention. Now we will see what are bodies for implementation. Under Disability Act, Chief Commissioner Person with Disability, Commissioner Person with Disability is there, and National and State Coordination Committee is there. Whereas under Disability Bill, National and State Commission for Person with Disability is there. Another important element which we are going to compare is access to public building. Although Disability Act has provided for access to public building, but it has not made it mandatory. Whereas Disability Bill says that all existing buildings shall be made accessible to person with disability within 5 years of time. And no establishment will be granted any permission to build any structure or any building if that building does not adhere to the regulation formulated by the Commission. Now coming to the offences and punishment. There is no provision for offences and punishment in Disability Act, whereas Disability Bill provides that any person who contravenes any provision of the Act shall be punishable for a term which may extend for 6 years for the first contravention, and for subsequent contraventions shall be punishable for a term which may extend to 2 years of fine or both. Another important provision which we are going to compare is punishment for committing atrocities. There is no provision for punishment for committing atrocities under Disability Act 1995, but Disability Bill 2014 has provided for minimum punishment for 6 months, which may extend to 5 years of term for committing the following offences. Last important element which we are going to compare is special code. There is no provision under Disability Act for special code, but under Disability Bill, a provision for special code is there which will try the offences under this Act. After completing this module, I hope you are in a position to appreciate rights of person with disability. You are in a position to understand what are the implementation mechanism given under the convention and what is the implementation given under the Act. I thank you for all your patience. Thank you.